I'll ask for the live stream to commence, please. Thank you very much. Right. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Nottinghamshire Local Pension Board, including John Raisin, who is joining us remotely. Hi, John. Can you hear us?
I can, Chair.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So shall we move on to the first item, which is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 29th of September, 2022. I ask the committee if the minutes can be agreed. Agreed. Thank you very much. And then we shall move on to the next item, which is apologies for absence.
No apologies received, Chair.
Okay. The next item is the declaration of interest by members and officers. And do we have any members or officers present who may have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Oh, take it as that. No. And do any members or officers present have any private interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? No. Thank you very much. The next item is item 4 on the agenda, which is the report from the advisor to the board on a training proposal for the board members covering pensions legislation and pensioners governance. I'd like to propose the following recommendation: that a training session covering pensions legislation and pensions governance be convened before the board's June 2023 meeting. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you very much. I now invite John Raisin to introduce his report.
Thank you, Chair. This report, as the Chair has indicated, makes a proposal that we hold a training session primarily for new members, but any member who hasn't attended before is also invited because it'll be updated from the last version in 2021. So if we go back to last year, we had a couple of papers on the approach to training, and last September there was a paper which proposed how we ought to carry out training, and one of the forms of training suggested was that I run sessions covering the 8 core areas within the SIPFA guidance for pension board members, and the first 2 of those are legislation and governance. Unless members actually understand the background to legislation and governance and how the LGPS is run, any understanding of actuarial matters, investment matters, pensions admin, etc., is to some extent negated, because the LGPS is a very particular pension scheme. It's different than all the other public service pension schemes in that it's funded, whereas all the other are unfunded. It is different from private sector defined benefit schemes, because although they are funded too, they are funded in a very different way, and most of them are in a very different place in the LGPS. So we really do need to understand the background and the governance as well. So that's the proposal. I mean, that session will be probably 1.5 hours to 2 hours, and hopefully we can run it between now and June at a date which is mutually convenient for myself, and particularly those members who haven't attended before. But as I say, those who've come before are more than welcome to join, because some of the content will be different than it was in 2021. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much, John. Any questions or comments or observations on his report?
I was asking not just board members, can committee members join it as well? When we're doing the training, might as well cover the wide spectrum of those people involved in the pension fund, Nottinghamshire's pension fund.
Right, John, if you can hear us, the question is, can we open it up to the committee members as well?
I have no problem whatsoever with that. I think that would be a positive development. Absolutely. I thank the councillor for his suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll move to a vote on that, on the agreeing the date for the training. Do I have any votes for the training? No, take it carried. Thank you very much. The next item is the local pension board LGPS update. And on this, I'd like to propose the following recommendation: that the board consider and comment on the LGPS update. Do I have a seconder for that? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. And now I'll invite John Raisin to introduce the update.
Thank you, Chair. This is an update from the last board, which was September. I've looked at 7 main issues here, which I'll go through one by one. Starting with developments at the DLUHC. As we know, last year there were a number of changes to central government, and at July last year we had a minister in the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities, Kemi Badenoch. She'd been the minister, I think, for getting on a year at the time. This was July 2022. She resigned from the government and was then replaced by someone called Paul Scully. And this was when Mr. Johnson was Prime Minister. When Ms. Truss became Prime Minister, Mr. Scully was retained in his post, which, from a continuity point of view, was very helpful. As we know, Ms. Truss was replaced by Mr. Sunak, and when Mr. Sunak took over, he relieved Mr. Scully of his role in the DLUHC, and we have now got a new minister as of November, a guy called Lee Rowley MP. So Lee Rowley MP is now the responsible minister for the LGPS. So if we go on to the second issue, climate reporting. There was a consultation on climate reporting, as you know, from the 1st of September to 24th of November 2022. I think I covered this last time. It was an extremely important consultation. And in fact, the DLUHC received about 120 responses. Now, there are very few staff working on the LGPS, so this has meant there's been a delay responding to the consultation. And when I wrote this paper on the 6th of March, the information I was getting was that they would bring in the regulations as of the 1st of April, but they would not actually issue them until afterwards. So they would actually be retrospective, but funds would have to abide by them from the 1st of April. The likelihood of them being delayed became even more so after yesterday, because yesterday the Chancellor made an announcement about LGPS pooling, which is the next topic. So I think any chance of the regulations coming out before the end of this month is virtually nil, and them coming out very early in the new year has perhaps been mitigated somewhat. The reason for that is investment pooling. Now, again, when I wrote this on the 6th of March, I wrote what I've written many times before, that the consultation expected since 2019 still not been issued. Jeremy Hunt had made a statement in December saying that we would consult in early 2023 on new guidance, but as members will remember, there were statements made by the Treasury back in 2020 that there would shortly be a consultation, and it hadn't happened. So you did wonder how quickly it would come. I was picking up intelligence that there have been discussions within the DLUHC, and so therefore it probably would happen in 2023, although there wasn't a clear timescale. Jeremy Hunt didn't give a clear timescale yesterday, but he made an important announcement in the Red Book, which accompanies the budget. And what he said, and I'll just read it to you, this is section 4116 of the Red Book. It's deep in that thick book that's issued alongside the budget. And I'll just quote a bit of it. He's saying that LGPS funds will be asked to, quote, move faster and further on consolidating assets. And the forthcoming consultation will propose LGPS funds transfer all listed assets into their pools by March 2025. This may include moving towards a smaller number of pools to optimise the benefits of scale. So that's quite interesting. He's talking about all listed assets. That's essentially listed equities and conventional bonds to be pooled by 2025. But at the moment, there are 8 pools. You're in LGPS Central. The government are talking about potentially reducing it below that number. And that's not what they're saying they're going to do, because they will consult. They will come out with a set of proposals. And to be fair to governments, and this has gone back many years, whoever's been in government, they have always taken consultation responses very seriously. So we don't know what the outcome will be, but that's what the government are clearly thinking about. They're also talking about consulting on requiring LGPS funds to consider investment opportunities in illiquid assets such as venture capital and growth capital. Note very carefully the words the government have used. Funds to consider. The government is not going to seek to mandate anyone to invest in anything that they do not think they ought to. Because, of course, it's up to the Pension Fund Committee to determine for Nottinghamshire or for any other fund which investments are congruent with their liabilities, their approach to investment, etc. So the government will be exhorting rather than requiring. So that was a very important proposal yesterday. We need to wait for the consultation to come out to see what's in it. But I think this will probably be the most important consultation since 2015, which of course was the one that set pooling initially. So a huge consultation to come, extremely important. Everyone will be waiting for that. So that was very big news yesterday. I'll stop there just in case anyone's any questions on that particular issue before I move on to the other issues which are important, but I think are not quite to the front as the issue I've just talked about.
Have we got any questions on John's report so far? No questions, John? Okay,
that's great. The next one is something I've not talked about previously because it hasn't come up directly as an issue, and it's pension fund accounts. The regulations require the pension fund to produce a set of accounts every year, but at the moment these accounts are part of the overall accounts of the administrative authority, in this case Nottinghamshire. Part of the problem now is that delays are occurring in producing the accounts, and this is occurring actually from two sides. It's been particularly so on the council side. No, I'm not talking about Nottinghamshire in particular, I'm talking about generally. There have been delays. I think it's mainly because of more stringent audit examinations. And if the council's main accounts aren't signed off, even if the pension accounts are signed off, then everything can't be signed off. And it's vice versa as well. If the pension account isn't signed off and the main accounts are the general fund, you can't sign everything off. So the Scheme Advisory Board has written to Lee Vowley, actually wrote to Paul Scully when he was minister, suggesting that the pension fund account be made completely separate from the general fund and the other accounts that any authority might have. This has already happened in Wales and Scotland, and it appears to have facilitated success in actually getting accounts audited and through. Helpfully, the Minister, Lee Vowley, has come back and has stated in writing that the DLUHC is actively considering the Scheme Advisory Board recommendation for separation. We clearly need to see how this progresses, but it is looking like that is on the government agenda at the request of the scheme. The fifth issue is consultation on changes to the SAB cost management process. Those of you who have been here on the board for some time will remember we've talked about the cost management process a number of times. Essentially, it was introduced in 2014-15 across all the public sector pension schemes to limit the costs to the taxpayer of benefits to employees, very simply put. And essentially there is a formula. That's simplifying it far too much, but that's what there is. There are two formulas which are utilised, and if these are breached, there's one formula which a Treasury runs, and there's a second formula which the Scheme Advisory Board runs. We have two in the LGPS. In the other funds, for example, at the NHS, the teachers, there's only one because they're unfunded. Because we have funding, we have two, because the second one is a check. For example, we use a different discount rate, or can do. Last year, 2021 rather, we asked the government actuary to review the Treasury approach because they were concerned it was going to be activated too often, and it's only meant to be activated in extremis. So the government actuary came up with a number of proposals which the government accepted. So they have broadened the criteria before a breach happens, and you have to either increase or decrease benefits or change employee contributions to bring the LGPS into line with that, and also to give the LGPS Scheme Advisory Board more flexibility in how it approaches the cost management process. There is a consultation out at the moment, and that consultation will close on the 24th of March. Another one which is perhaps quite important to employers and to funds, or some employers, is the reclassification of the further education sector. Some years ago, the further education sector was moved out of central government, and it was put into the non-profit institutions sector. It's now been moved back to the central government sector. So that means that further education colleges are, in lawful terms, legal terms, part of central government. Now, as you know, the LGPS regulations require further education colleges to offer all their non-teaching staff membership of the LGPS. Now, the way that the actuaries and fund officers look at further education colleges at the moment is that they have a fairly weak covenant, because if they get into a problem, there's no one effectively to bail them out, unlike, for example, academy schools. So in the actuarial process, they are treated slightly differently, and their covenants are treated differently by funds. It's not so favourable towards them. Now, the government has not changed the funding mechanism as a result of this reclassification. However, the Scheme Advisory Board does intend to discuss with government about this, and there may well be some sort of funding guarantee, maybe, may not be, as there is with academies. If there is, then funds will have to look, and they'll have to look individually as to whether they change their approach to how they classify and treat further education bodies in the actuarial process and in the employer contribution process. But there was actually no change as a result of the reclassification, but it could lead to change. Just one final one, a pension increase 2023, and I'm going to talk about lifetime allowance and annual allowance briefly afterwards. The Treasury announced on the 20th of February that the pensions increase for next year will be 10.1%. It has been practiced, but it's not actually a requirement of government. It's been a practice that LGPS pensions, impayments and deferred benefits and benefits earned since 2014 by actives are increased in line with inflation from April, as the inflation was the previous September. That has been confirmed for 2023, 10.1%. Just something extra. Yesterday, Jeremy Hunt announced to the Chancellor the lifetime allowance would be scrapped and the annual allowance will be increased from 40,000 to 60,000. This is something which will affect both, I think, senior middle managers and senior officers, because certainly senior middle managers and senior officers would reach the lifetime allowance if they served a significant number of years in the scheme. That was at 107,300. So there were an increasing number of officers who were going to breach the lifetime allowance, which has significant tax penalties if you do. And there's also the annual allowance, which was 40,000. Now, the way you calculate that, and John Clues will tell me if I'm wrong here, but my calculation is that under the present annual allowance, you can up to about 122,000, I think, or thereabouts. If you earn above that, then you are likely to incur a penalty. The new annual allowance of 60,000 means I think you earn up to about 183,000, 184,000 before receiving a penalty. So that will take out many, or most, the vast majority of local government officers out of the sort of the annual allowance scheme. So for most LGPS employees, not all, but the vast majority, they will now not be subject to the caps which have applied for the last well over a decade now, I think. That's all really, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Becky?
Yes. In February, the Home Office launched a consultation on the McCloud on the regulations to enact the remedy for McCloud. Has that got any impact? Have you managed to have a look at that, see if it's got any impact on the LGPS?
Well, it will have an impact. I mean, anything to do with McCloud affects the LGPS, because McCloud affects all 7 schemes. How it affects schemes is different, and we're still waiting for all of this outcome from it. For example, this judicial review which the Fire Brigade Union have raised. So there are an awful lot of issues still unresolved on McCloud. The final remedy in detail is not yet announced. That's why funds cannot implement it. But I'll defer to John here, because he probably has more detailed knowledge on this than I do.
Yeah, John's right. I mean, in terms of the remedy, we're still waiting for it, and we believe it's probably going to be put back a bit further. We were expecting it in October. So in terms of the question, it is going to impact on members. We don't know how much. We're still collecting the data as we speak, and it's also going to
we believe also it's going to impact on levers as well. So we're going to have to do some recalculations on levers as well as actives and deferred. So it's still in its raw state in terms of us collecting the data and then adding on the remedy when it's released following the consultation. But I believe it's probably going to be later in the autumn before we get anything back. But that's just conjecture, really.
Can I just come back there? I think they've released the draft legislation now for comments. I think the deadline is October 23, isn't it, to get it through Parliament? So I think my understanding is that they're aiming to achieve that still at the moment.
Yeah, what will happen is it'll go through Parliament, and then they'll have to rewrite the regulations unless they get on top of that as part of that process of going through Parliament. So it'll go through Parliament, it'll be agreed, and then regulations will have to be written for it to be implemented. So that's why we believe it's probably going to be later in the autumn, unless they've got ahead of that at some point.
Any other questions?
I just add to what John said there. One of the great issues is, as John has said, that primary legislation goes through and then everything has to be put into regulation. Anything which is particular to the LGPS, of course, has to be dealt with by the Ministry of Levelling of Housing and Communities, or Department of Levelling of Housing and Communities, rather. They do not have a huge number of people working on our LGPS. And as we've seen, the issues of pooling, for example, it's the top issue. You've got to put pooling in, you've got to put climate change in, you've got to put McLeod in. All of those could have a delay on each other, if you follow what I mean. So, as John said, there could be further delays. Pooling is a good example. The government consulted in 2019 said they would finish it off in 2019. We're now in 2023. So I wouldn't put October as a date for McLeod to be sorted out at all.
Thank you. John?
But just to add to that, we're also the software providers are working on we'll have to work on the changes in the software in terms of the calculations, because whilst some of it will be processed through the admin system, we are envisaging having to do quite a few manual calculations.
I think our concern is for members, it's very difficult to find out information about how it will affect them. And I know fire, for example, is far further down the line because we're so much more affected. But we're in a position now where we've got, with the draft legislation, we're actually paying remedy payments. So it seems like a bit unfair that the LGPS are so far behind because this legislation's been waiting for so long, and now we've got draft legislation. It's unfortunate that the regulations can't be changed more quickly.
One of the things about the regulations, and it's happened in the past, is how those regulations are drafted, and sometimes when they're rushed, they make poor regulations. So I suspect they'll probably take their time on this because of the implication of recalculating people's pensions. But again, that's only my opinion, but that's the opinion of other pension admin managers around when we've discussed it. So it's just a case of wait and see, I think.
Thank you. And I've just got a bit of an interesting question related to that, which is, when the legislation is done, will there be a communications plan, or is there a way that they'll let everybody know?
Yes, clearly. We've had a few questions back from a few members, as bits of McLeod have been discussed in the press or elsewhere. So we have responded to individuals, but basically we've been saying we're collecting your data, we're waiting for the remedy, and we'll get back to you. So we have in our project plan, communications plan of some sort, but clearly we can't go much further until we know what the remedy is going to be and the actual impact for members. So I'm sure the national communications group, which there is one, will be looking at that as part of the implementation plan across the LGPS.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No, John Knight, thank you very much for your report. And I know there's loads of technicals involved in there, so thank you for making it easy for us to understand. The next item is that as part of the recommendation was to consider and comment on the LGPS. We'll now move to a vote. Is that agreed? That we've done that? That's great. Thank you very much. The next item is a report on the LGPS Governance Conference that took place on the 19th and 20th of January this year. And report is to be presented by John Clues. But before I hand over to John, I'd like to propose recommendation on page 24 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder for that? And if you wish, I can read out what the recommendation is. Yeah, and the recommendation is that this is just for noting. So are we happy to accept that? Oh, thank you very much. Right, over to you, John.
Thanks, Chair. This is an update report. Clearly, it's quite a lengthy report, and I'll pick up some of the highlights of the conference. The conference was attended by the board chair and Councillor Mike Trona from the deputy chair of the Pensions Committee, along with myself. The conference is, as I say, an annual conference, and it generally picks up on governance issues across the LGPS. So the first keynote address was around complaint handling, and this was presented by the Pension Ombudsman. Really, the main message that the Ombudsman was trying to give in their address was for funds to look at how they handle complaints and how funds handle complaints. Obviously, there is the internal disputes resolution procedure that all funds operate within, and we tend to have a number of complaints over the years. The biggest complaints that funds are reporting is the issue of complaints in respect of ill health retirements. This is where employers retire individuals or members on ill health and may not have followed the processes that they need to. And we do tend to get quite a few complaints coming through in respect of how employers have I suppose, managed ill health, and that was a concern for the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman also highlighted the need to communicate better with scheme employers and scheme members, and when dealing with complaints, about saying sorry if there has been a mistake. So we do have quite a bit of we do have conversations with the scheme ombudsman from time to time around individual cases. We tend to find that we do work quite well with them in addressing some of the concerns that are, and complaints that are highlighted. And we will be bringing in the annual report the sort of conclusion on our complaints for the previous year. The Ombudsman highlighted the fact that they do use volunteers in trying to mitigate some of the complaints that go through. So, the next part of the conference was the Scheme Advisory Board update by John Richards, the Unison and SAB Vice Chair. This was presented by him, but prior to his session, we had a video address from Lee Rowley, which John mentioned, who John mentioned earlier, and Lee Rowley wanted to express his optimism about what the LGPS can achieve going forward, and highlighted a few areas. The Minister finished his address by highlighting the work done by the Scheme Advisory Board to improve the governance and administration of the LGPS, and commented on the great value he places on the support of SAB in carrying out the role. John was laid out a few particular issues in his address, and one being on investment pooling. Again, John's highlighted that in his presentation. We then had a presentation from a member view and an employer view, and one of the points was raised is about how the LGPS deals with some of its employers, and in particular universities. Nottinghamshire doesn't really have a problem. I don't think has a problem with in this respect. In terms of, we have a good working relationship with Nottinghamshire Trent University, and I wasn't quite sure from the presentation what they were trying to get, other than the need for funds to ensure good communication with scheme employers, and ensure that I suppose LGPS members understand the value of their benefits, and that's a responsibility of the fund and of scheme employers. The discussion then went on around talking about asset pooling. We then had a presentation, as we always do, on keeping on the right side of the law. One of the issues that was highlighted was around pensions transfers, and we have previously presented a report on transfers and the need to be very vigilant in when excuse me, I've got tongue tied. To be vigilant when allowing transfers out of the fund. Clearly, members do choose to transfer out, and what was highlighted was the fact that the regulations allow members to transfer out, but the pension regulator expects us to be vigilant in terms of where those transfers go. And we did make changes to our process last year, and really they were just highlighting the fact that we need to keep vigilant and put resources in place to ensure that members do not transfer and lose their benefits, as has been the case previously. We then went on to have a presentation about responsible investment, and there were some examples provided by the Yorkshire Pension Authority, and basically it was all about responsible investment and maintaining records and being able to provide statistics and information to Pensions Committee and to members around where our investments are, but I'll leave that for our finance colleagues to explain that one. On the second day, I think the second day was more more interesting in the fact that we had a presentation by the regulator who highlighted a number of challenges coming forward, one being the new single code of practice, which was due to be released this March, which I believe has been put back till the summer. So this is where the regulator is bringing together a number of codes of practice into one single code, and the pension fund will be required to measure itself against that new code of practice. The other area was highlighted was cyber risk, and the need for the LGPS to be vigilant in dealing with and ensuring that we're not a target for cyber criminals. We also had advice from the regulator for elected members, and the regulator was highlighting the need for governance and administration to be high on the agenda. It was acknowledged that pension processes vary from fund to fund, as they do, but this should be slick and well designed. The regulator also focused on the administration of funds and committees and boards should ensure that resources are in place to meet future needs, and that was one of the messages that came across throughout the conference. We then had a presentation around fund valuation, and Barnett Waddingham, who are our actuaries, explained how the LGPS employees have increased, and we've seen that in our pension fund and the challenges that brings to funds. What we are proposing is that we should invite the scheme actuary to either our next meeting or one of the meetings over the coming year, in order to pick up some of these issues around the fund and the valuation, so that board members can ask questions and understand the completion of the valuation for 2022. We then went on to the administration challenges, and there was a panel discussion around admin. There was discussion about some of the future policy challenges that we just discussed around McLeod, the pension dashboard. It was explained that there will be a need for all pension fund leavers to have their calculations reviewed as part of the McLeod rectification, which I've previously said, and it further highlights how there's going to be a need for manual checks through McLeod. Other challenges were raised, and as the board has had a report on the pension dashboard, and following the writing of this report, it's been announced by the government that the dashboard is going to be put back, and we're waiting for further information for Do Look on that. There was a discussion by DFID Pension Fund, that how they explained how they had restructured their admin teams, and this was trying to address some of the recruitment issues that certainly some of the pension funds have had. Clearly, what they were showing is that the market for LGPS administration staff is across the UK now, and not just geographical. And some funds are actually offering premiums to recruit experienced staff. It was also highlighted about the significant role of committees and boards have in advancing an improvement in administration matters. I think I've set out, there was a discussion from before on pay and gradings for pension funds and the difficulties in recruitment and retention. There was then a presentation on the Good Governance Project by Ian Colvin from Hyman Robertson. They are the scheme matches that led the governance. Sorry, I thought it had fallen out there. They're the scheme matches who led the governance project, and they have, and there are a number of recommendations that are with DoLook at the moment. One of the things that was pointed out at the conference was the recommendation for funds to have a workforce strategy, which needs to focus on resource needs and plans to recruit and retain staff. So that was very much a discussion point. We then closed the conference with a presentation on investments, and I'll leave that there, Chair. I think that covers most of the conference as set out.
Thank you very much, John. Any questions or any clarification from his reports? No? No, that's great. All right, so shall move on to the next item, and I put this back on. And that is the Local Government Pension Scheme Risk Register. And this report will be presented by John, but before I hand over to John, I'd like to propose a recommendation on page 31 of the agenda pack. And the recommendation on that is that we consider whether there are any actions that are required in relation to the issues contained within the risk strategy report. Can I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Raj. And we shall move on. John, if you'd like to take us through the report.
Yeah, hopefully this is a short report on my part. It's really a presentation to the pension board to show the risks as they've been highlighted across pensions administration and pensions finance. And I would just note this, that if there are any questions in relation to the risk that we've highlighted, the risk register is due for a review, because we review it every year, and we review it on an ongoing basis, but we do a full review of the risks in April to present to Pensions Committee, and that's done by myself and colleagues in finance. We get together and go through all the risks to ensure that we are capturing everything that we need to capture. So I would just present this risk register as read, and ask if there are any comments or questions on any of the risks that have been highlighted in the report.
Right, got Sarah.
Yeah, just thank you for that. I just wanted to add to what John has said about the review. We've currently, or we've done a piece of work with the council's insurer Zurich, looking at corporate risks, and given the benefit that we've seen to that corporately, I've agreed with my counterpart in investments, Keith Pulfreman, that actually we will engage Zurich to work with us to do an independent review and actually look at how we do write up the risk, and are we covering everything, particularly around the cyber attack. So that will hopefully take place in the next couple of months, and will then be used as the basis to do the full review in April as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Reggie there with a question.
Sorry, Sarah's just answered part of it, because I was going to ask you about cyber. Where are we in? Because we know that's a big risk, not just to Nottinghamshire but to the whole country on cyber. But you've just answered that question. And the other question I've got, is, has this been considered by the Pensions Committee, and are they at the forefront of this? Accept that what's in here is risk free.
John Clues?
So, thanks, Councillor. Yes, the risk register will go to the Pensions Committee for review as well, and like I say, myself and Tamsin are planning that over the next couple of meetings.
I think that review will include the work that we do with Zurich as well, so it captures all of that, and the cyber activity, and also linked to cyber is what are the business continuity and disaster recovery plans for the pension admin side, so that if we do have a cyber attack, etc., we've got those right plans in place, they have been tested, and we're able to stand a service back up if that was to occur.
John Clues?
Just to answer that as well, we do have there's a draft report we have been looking at cyber as an ongoing issue, and there is a draft report ready. But I think we thought that it was going to be an easier report to write than it actually has. As you go through and look at some of the issues, we then find we need to address various of those. Not in terms of the risk, because the risk is covered, but we want to make sure that we encompass everything in that report. And as Sarah said, it's like a moving feast. So there will be a report coming to Pension Board and Pensions Committee.
I've got just a couple of questions on the risk register, which obviously the good governance report and McLeod and all those other things that are coming in terms of the risk, part of the risk is obviously to ensure that we've got adequate staffing and adequate people in order to be able to take that on. Thank you. I think Sarah's got a...
Yes, I mean, I think John and I are fully aware of, the work that's coming. Obviously, we've had discussions here previously about resourcing as well. So we have an internal planning day in a few weeks. That's followed by some activity with our systems provider, Civica. We have a bank of contracted service days that we're going to use from them to project manage a number of additions to our system, which should support ultimately our resourcing levels. One of those being monthly returns. We are fully aware that our structure needs to be reviewed and needs to be fit for purpose going forward. I think both John and I over the years have commented about data. Board will be fully aware that we have had for a couple of years quite an extensive data audit and improvement programme running. We are coming hopefully towards the end of that, which will then enable us to move forward with monthly returns. The Employer Support and Compliance team are also doing employer audits, and certainly one of the things that John and I have talked about is as part of our annual admin performance report. Actually, what we need to now start to do is to report on the performance of scheme employers themselves, because the fund is reliant on scheme employers providing accurate data in a timely manner. So one of the things that is it hits us every year, but hopefully this is the last year. That is the receipt of new starter forms towards the end of, or as part of the year-end process, where monthly returns would start to smooth out that particular peak of activity. I think going forward, we're minded that our structure will need to have a data team who are then monitoring very closely the performance of scheme employers. They are chasing on a monthly basis the data, and that should then lead us through to doing the bulk processing and start to release our experienced team to do the more complex cases. I think the other thing is around recruitment and retention. And I think we need to have consideration to things such as a career grade structure, so that people come in at an entry level but see then pensions administration as a career pathway, and that is linked to professional development and qualifications. So there are a number of things in or happening in the background, which ultimately obviously will bring a report to both committee and board to present what our sort of succession planning and workforce strategy is going forward.
John Reason, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I have, Chair. It was very helpful to hear what Sarah said about the review of the pension fund risk register. Could I just seek assurance on behalf of the board that any review of the pension fund risk register will take full account of the SIPFA guidance of 2018 managing risk in the local government pension scheme, which is clear that pension funds should have their own approach to risk and should not simply follow the council approach, and that any review will look at the 7 areas of risk that SIPFA identified, which relate specifically to the LGPS. So all I'm asking is that I assume in that review, the officers, etc., will be looking at the SIPFA guidance of 2018 and will be guiding that review, and that Zurich will take account of those particular requirements that SIPFA have laid down.
So,
John, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, in response to that.
It's just for the record, I think it's useful to make that clear, because I know there are other funds have been looking at risk registers and the approach of their fund to risk, and you're clearly moving in the right direction. I just wanted to clarify that, but thank you.
right, thank you very much, John. Councillor Nair?
Thank you, Chair. I just need a clarification in terms of the communication aspect, that whether the communication is accessible and there is consideration for those whose English is not the first language. Is there consideration for those when the communication goes out, especially to the members?
Hi. Thank you for the question. Yes, the answer to the question is yes. We do try and take consideration in terms of the language that we use and how we communicate. We have just recently implemented the new pension website, which is being developed further. We've actually moved from an old website technology to slightly newer technology. So we are looking at our communication plan, which we're required to present to pension committee and to yourselves in the coming months following that review of that website. So yes, we do, but we could do better, to be honest. So we are going to be looking at that as part of our communication strategy.
Can
I Sarah?
We do also have access to the translation service if English isn't the first language through our customer service centre as well.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Sorry, Becky?
Thanks. I know there's probably some way down the line, but in your communication strategy, if you looked at the pension dashboards for members to go in so they can sort of get estimates for themselves. And I know you've got lots on, and this is not an imminent thing, but it's I would just like to know your plans.
Yes, so a couple of things really. So we've got the pensions dashboard as it's been developed nationally. So we are we have that in place and that plan. We've signed up to a provider, which is Civica on for us, in terms of how we link to the national dashboard. So that's all going through. In terms of what I believe you're asking in terms of members' access. So as part of the review that Sarah mentioned and our planning, we will be putting in place the member portal, and that all links to our monthly returns project, which again Sarah mentioned earlier. So it all links together. So we'll go on to monthly returns, and as part of that process, we will look at implementing the member portal as well. So it's all one project really. It's just when we stage it all, and that's one of the things that we're going to be discussing at our day. It's a case of which comes first. The main thing is to move on to monthly returns first, so that we've got up to date data rather than having annual data, and then that will feed through to opening up the member portal.
Yeah, it's not a lot of point if you've just got,
No,
you know, you have your
absolutely.
ABS information in there, won't you? So yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Now we move on to the next item, penultimate item, which is the pension board work programme. And I formally move the work programme recommendation, which is on page 50 of the pack. Do members require any amendments to the work programme? John Clues?
It might be worth me explaining one or two things that we've put onto the programme, and maybe looking at how we take this forward. So we put just to clarify, we put summer, autumn onto the and others to be placed because at the time of writing we hadn't got the dates for the pension board. So we do; those have now been set. So what we will do is link some of these to actual dates of the board. What we've tried to do is try to highlight some of the main activities that we need to bring to you on a regular basis. But clearly, as I've said and Sarah mentioned, there will be other reports placed over the coming year to update you on progress of various projects. As you can see, we've put some of the main items down that have an impact. So this is why we were thinking in terms of the funding strategy and the valuation, we would ask the scheme actuary to come and give you an update in relation to the valuation and our funding strategies. Obviously, we've got the LGPS report. We need to bring a report to you about the pension regulator, a single code, as I mentioned before, because that particular code will drive some of the other work for the board. Because, as I said, we will need to measure ourselves against that, and you would want to know how we measure against the code. We've talked about the risk register. There is an ongoing project around guaranteed minimum pension, which again we're coming to a position around communicating out to members on the guaranteed minimum pension update, and we will need to tell you what the the pension fund process is going to be in updating members' benefits through that project. And then we've put the board training programme on there, as John had described earlier. And really, that sets the scene going forward across the year. I suppose it's now out there for yourselves to decide if there's anything else that you wish to have placed on the work programme going forward. One thing that I ought to say, sorry to go on, but one thing I ought to say as well is we'll need to bring strategies to you because we're due to report to pensions committee on strategies, and those need to come here as well, and those will be placed. I'll be talking to Tamsin about that as we go on. So this will change over to, for the next meeting.
Can I bring in Councillor Reg?
Yeah. I just at this point, and I think we discussed this once before, and I sometimes have a talk with the chairman of the pensions committee, and we still seem quite far apart. And I would think a closer liaison between the board and the committee would help. And perhaps when the valuation update or whatever, we should have the chairman of the pensions committee and whoever is there, because at the end of the day, we need to know that the valuations and all those risks and everything, they're all taken care of by the pensions committee. And I think if the board has got a relationship with the pensions committee, then overall, I think we can have a better governance oversight.
I think it's something I'd agree with, and it's something that we've been working on for closer working. We had the chair of the pension committee come to not the last one, but the previous one, and we're trying to kind of get that. And your idea about the training is absolutely great. So I think it'd be great if it was also reciprocated, so the committee and the board attend each other's training, and therefore that ups all our knowledge and on these matters. Right. Any other?
I don't know, Chairman, if that causes any admin problems, does it?
Like I say, we have got the dates now, so we'll be able to plan that in the council.
Any other further questions before I conclude the meeting? Yeah. So, Mark.
Apologies, Chair. I meant to ask this question earlier on. One of the risks you spoke about before at previous meetings, John, was recruitment and retention. Has there been any improvements regarding this issue?
Well, there has been improvements because we did manage to recruit 4 people prior to Christmas, and we've been training them. So we have increased our resource. As I reported in my report, all funds are still struggling in relation to new staff. We do intend to start to go through another round of recruitment at some point to try and recruit additional staff for the McLeod project. But it's just an ongoing issue. As Sarah said about training and career grades and things of that nature, there's been some movement nationally in terms of looking at apprenticeship scheme for the LGPS, and there's been some work done by the LGA on that. I actually did a presentation to the pensions managers conference in November, trying to drum up, drum up enthusiasm to look at a national apprenticeship scheme for the LGPS, and that seems to have taken on board. It's just a case of what other priorities are going on in the LGPS. So to answer your question, we have improved our resource. We need to improve it further and to try and recruit further. But as all funds are having, we're having some difficulty in doing that. We are moving our resources around to try and meet our priorities, and that's what we try and do. But we do intend to try and recruit further. I think one good thing is we've got somebody who, I know this is just an anecdote really, but we've got somebody who left us, and is hoping to is coming back to the UK, and we're hoping to re-recruit that person. So we are doing the best that we can in terms of trying to get new people, but it is very difficult, and the other problem is it takes time to recruit, to train people, because of the complicated nature of the regulations and the fund. It does take time, so it's not a quick fix. You can't just bring somebody in and put them in front of a computer. It takes quite a lot of resource to do that. So we're looking at that and trying to improve it, but it's a difficult thing to do.
Thank you. Any further questions? If there are no any further questions, that concludes the business of the board, and I'd like to thank you all, members and officers, for your contribution, and formally close the meeting. Could we end the live stream?